Darkness Awakens. Dawn of the Zombie Era. Chapter 1. Omens in the Rain. The rain poured relentlessly, turning the streets into shimmering silver streams. Each droplet hitting the asphalt sounded like a distant drum, a rhythm heralding something ominous. John, clad in his black raincoat with an umbrella clutched tightly, walked briskly, sidestepping the forming puddles. But it wasn't the rain that troubled him. It was the eerie feeling of being watched, of not being alone in the night. As he crossed a street, he noticed a group of people standing motionless beneath a streetlight. Their gaze was vacant, as if entranced. A chill ran down John's spine. There was something profoundly unsettling about the sight, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Seeking refuge, he entered an old library he was familiar with. It was a serene place, a haven from the rain and the night's oddities. As he leafed through some old newspapers to pass the time, a particular article caught his eye. It spoke of an experiment conducted in a covert laboratory, an audacious attempt to defy death itself. But the article's date had been torn off, making it impossible to determine its age. Engrossed in his reading, a frail, quivering voice interrupted him. "You shouldn't be reading that, young man," whispered an elderly librarian, her eyes deep and wise. "There are tales best left in the past." John looked up, taken aback. "Why?" he inquired, curiosity gleaming in his eyes. "What's so perilous about this article?" The librarian leaned in, glancing around as if fearing eavesdroppers. "That experiment. It wasn't mere urban legend. I've heard whispers, tales of individuals altered after being declared dead. Rumor has it the lab still exists, hidden beneath the city." John's heart raced. His journalistic instincts urged him to unearth the truth, to delve deeper. "I need to know more," he asserted. The librarian gazed at him sorrowfully. "If you choose this path, tread carefully. Dark forces are at play, things the human eye shouldn't witness." But John was resolute. He had a lead, a story that could be groundbreaking, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. As he stepped out of the library, the rain had ceased, but the air still hung heavy with foreboding. John knew he was venturing into a realm of shadows and secrets, but he was prepared to face whatever lay ahead in his quest for the truth. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The sky was a heavy shade of gray, with clouds amassing in threatening formations, as if conspiring against the world below. John, his leather satchel tucked under his arm, treaded the city streets, each step echoing like a distant drumbeat. Every corner, every alleyway seemed to harbor a secret. He was hell-bent on uncovering the truth behind the experiment mentioned in the old newspaper. As he neared an age-old cafe, a female figure seated by the window caught his eye. She had chestnut hair and was engrossed in jotting down notes in a journal. Her posture was tense, as if on high alert. John approached cautiously, trying not to draw undue attention. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Sarah?" John inquired, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Sarah slowly lifted her gaze, her eyes deep and probing. "Yes, that's me, and who might you be?" "My name's John. I'm a journalist, and I'm digging for information about an experiment conducted in a covert lab. I came across an article about it, and..." Sarah cut him off with a hand gesture. "I know what you're referring to. I've noticed oddities in the city, too. People vanishing, then returning, altered." John's heart raced. Any clue what might have transpired? Sarah cast a wary glance around. "Not here. Follow me," They made their way to the dilapidated laboratory. The building stood like a behemoth of brick and rust, weathered by time. The entrance door was slightly ajar, a cold draft emanating from within. Inside, it felt as though time had stood still. Old notes, vials, and instruments lay scattered. But what struck John and Sarah were the photographs pinned to the walls. They depicted individuals with glassy eyes, mirroring the descriptions from the article. As they scrutinized the photos, a noise from the floor above startled them. Heavy footsteps, followed by a muffled moan. They weren't alone. Sarah clutched John's arm. "We need to hide," she whispered, her voice quivering. But it was too late. A figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes lifeless, skin pallid and decaying. It was a zombie, but not just any. John recognized it as an old childhood friend. The creature lumbered forward, emitting a guttural groan. Thinking on her feet, Sarah grabbed a vial from a table and hurled it at a window, creating an escape route. "John, now!" she yelled. With a mix of terror and adrenaline, John followed Sarah out of the lab, his heart pounding in his chest. As they retreated, the gravity of the situation dawned on John. The experiment wasn't mere folklore. It was real and had unleashed an evil threatening to engulf the city. With teary eyes, Sarah uttered, "We have to stop them. We need to find a way." John nodded, resolute. "We will, together." And so, as the rain persisted, two brave souls embarked on a mission to rescue their city from the engulfing darkness. Chapter 3. The Buried Truth. The sky was blanketed with gray clouds, and the falling rain felt like an endless lament. Streets lay abandoned, and the atmosphere was thick with palpable anticipation. John and Sarah walked side by side, their coats wrapped tightly around them, shielding from the biting rain. Each step echoed on the cobblestone, their shadows eerily dancing in the lamplight. As they crossed a square, a lone figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and eyes that had witnessed too much. He wore an old military jacket bearing the weight of a tormented past. "Are you John?" he asked, his voice deep and gravelly. John nodded, eyeing him warily. "Who are you?" The man replied, "Name's Mike. I need your help." Sarah, with a questioning glance, inquired, "Why should we help you?" Mike hesitated, then answered, "My sister was involved in that experiment. After being declared dead, she came back. But she wasn't the same." A chill ran down John's spine. "What do you mean?" Mike looked down, a solitary tear tracing his cheek. It was as if she'd lost her soul. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. Just watched. Sarah covered her mouth, horror evident in her eyes. "Oh my God." Mike continued, "I started digging and found out the experiment was part of a government project. They aimed to create super soldiers, but something went awry." John ran a hand through his hair, grappling with the revelations. "We need to stop them. We have to find a way to halt the virus's spread." As they spoke, a muffled moan from a nearby alleyway drew their attention. It was followed by heavy footsteps. The trio turned to see a horde of zombies slowly approaching. Their eyes were glassy, their skin pallid and rotting. Their movements were clumsy, yet they were relentless. Mike pulled a knife from his belt, taking a defensive stance. "Stay behind me," he commanded. John and Sarah complied as Mike engaged the zombies. Each strike was precise, every move calculated. It was clear Mike was a trained soldier, but the horde seemed endless. Sarah, trying to assist, grabbed an iron rod from the ground, striking at the encroaching zombies. John, a mix of terror and resolve, joined the fray, using anything within reach as a weapon. The battle felt endless, but eventually, with Mike's combat skills and John and Sarah's determination, they managed to fend off the horde. Catching their breath, Mike stated, "We don't have much time. We need to find a way to stop this virus before it's too late." John nodded, resolute. "You're right. We need to act now." Sarah, her eyes glistening, added, "And we need to do it together. It's the only way we stand a chance." The trio set forth, determined to uncover the truth and save the city from the looming darkness. And as the sky slowly began to clear, a glimmer of hope started to shine on the horizon. Chapter 4. The Final Dawn. The sky was a tapestry of stars, and the full moon bathed the city in a silvery glow. John, Sarah, and Mike sat in an old warehouse, surrounded by maps, notes, and aged newspapers. A kerosene lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, filling the air with palpable tension. "We need a plan," John said, his eyes locked on the map of the government building. "The antidote is in there, I know it, but how do we get in?" With a determined look, Sarah answered, "I've heard there's an underground tunnel system connecting the building to an old, abandoned hospital. We could use it to sneak in." Mike nodded. "I served in that hospital when it was still operational. I know those tunnels like the back of my hand." John looked at Mike, astonished. "Why didn't you mention this before?" Mike hesitated, then said, "I didn't want to go back. Too many memories. But if it's the only way..." Sarah laid a hand on Mike's shoulder. "You're not alone. We'll do this together." After hours of meticulous planning, the trio was ready. Armed to the teeth and fueled by unyielding resolve, they set off toward the government building. As they ventured deeper into the tunnels, the air grew colder and damper. Each step echoed ominously, and the shadows seemed to harbor unsettling secrets. But they weren't alone. Along the way, they discovered old documents and notes revealing the truth about the experiment. The government knew the risks, but had continued for unknown reasons. Perhaps for power, perhaps for wealth. One thing was certain. They had gambled with people's lives. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the government building. But they weren't alone. Shadows moved in the darkness, and eerie moans filled the air. The building's corridor was shrouded in oppressive darkness, broken only by the flickering light of an emergency lamp. The atmosphere was thick, charged with a sense of impending doom. John, Sarah, and Mike moved cautiously, each step resonating like a war drum. Mike, gripping a weathered baseball bat, moved with silent determination. The bat bore the scars of countless battles. Each nick and dent told a story of survival. Sarah, in her lab coat and carrying a bag full of vials and equipment, seemed out of place in this apocalyptic setting. But her gaze was steady and resolute. John, his camera hanging around his neck, was ready to document every moment, but he was more than a mere observer. He held a gun, ready to defend himself and his companions. Suddenly, a distant moan shattered the silence. Then another, and another, until the air was filled with a chorus of unsettling wails. The zombies were closing in. Mike took the front line, his baseball bat at the ready. At the first sign of movement, he struck with brutal force, taking down the approaching zombie. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, a horde of creatures advanced, their eyes vacant and mouths agape in a silent scream. Sarah, with surprising agility, pulled vials filled with a fluorescent liquid from her bag. "This should slow them down," she exclaimed, hurling the vials at the zombies. Upon contact, The liquid burst into blue flames, creating a firewall between them and the advancing creatures. John, with pinpoint accuracy, shot at zombies trying to circumvent the fire, covering Mike and Sarah's backs. Each shot was calculated. Every bullet mattered. After a fierce and bloody battle, the trio managed to repel the horde and locate the antidote. It was in a hidden safe behind a painting, guarded like the most precious treasure. But there was no time to waste. They had to administer it before it was too late. With trembling yet steady hands, Sarah connected the antidote to the ventilation system. "This should disperse the antidote throughout the city," she said, "but it will take time." The trio braced themselves for the final showdown. Zombies, drawn by the scent, were converging on them from all directions. But John, Sarah, and Mike were ready. The building's corridor echoed with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant wails of zombies. The atmosphere was tense, charged with agonizing anticipation. Every shadow seemed to conceal mortal danger. Every sound was an omen of death. Mike, his baseball bat now blood-stained, took the front line, ready to defend his companions to the end. Each movement was calculated, each strike an act of sheer determination. With every zombie he took down, a defiant roar echoed through the air, a refusal to surrender to the darkness. Sarah, her lab coat now dirty and torn, pulled more vials of fluorescent liquid from her bag. With surgical precision, she set up a series of chemical traps, barriers of fire and smoke that slowed the advancing creatures. John, gun in hand, shot with unerring accuracy, covering his companions' backs. Each shot was a bulwark against the darkness, each bullet a beacon in the night. But just when it seemed they might pull through, a tragic turn of events changed everything. Mike, while trying to protect Sarah from a group of zombies, was overwhelmed. One creature grabbed his leg, causing him to fall. And in an instant, he was surrounded. John and Sarah, their eyes filled with horror, watched as their friend and comrade was engulfed by a swarm of the undead. Sarah, her eyes glistening with a mix of rage and despair, pulled out one of her last vials, a concentrate of highly reactive chemicals. With a swift and decisive motion, she hurled it into the midst of the horde. The ensuing explosion was devastating, a blazing inferno that consumed many of the zombies in a hellfire of flame and ash. But despite the explosion creating an opening, it was too late for Mike. The zombies had reached him, and his brave sacrifice bought John and Sarah the precious time they needed to escape. As the blue liquid dispersed into the air, the zombies began to drop one by one, like puppets with their strings cut. The city, shrouded in darkness for far too long, was finally seeing the light. Dawn broke, its golden rays illuminating a world forever changed. John and Sarah, the weight of loss heavy in their hearts, stepped out of the building, looking out at the awakening city. The battle had been won, but the cost was steep. John, camera in hand, knew he had a story to tell. Not just of the battle, but of Mike's sacrifice. Not for fame or glory, but as a warning. A warning that even in the face of the darkest abyss, humanity has the strength to fight and to hope. And as the sun rose, he began taking pictures, determined to tell the truth to the world, to honor Mike's memory, and to ensure his sacrifice would never be forgotten. If you're eager to dive into more tales like this, stories that will make you feel every emotion, every chill, every suspenseful moment, then, my friend, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and embark on this journey. You won't regret it. Kiss of Death. Surviving the seduction of a vampire. The night enveloped Velinthra like a dark, dense, oppressive cloak. My footsteps echoed on the damp cobblestones as I ventured deeper into the city's narrow alleys, drawn by a presence I felt but couldn't see. There was no moon, only darkness, dotted with faint lights from closed windows. It was in one of these alleys that I first saw her. She stood still under the dim glow of a streetlight. Her black hair cascaded over her shoulders, contrasting with her marble-pale skin. She wore a tight black dress outlining every curve of her body. Her emerald green eyes locked onto mine with a paralyzing intensity. As I approached, I noticed her calm, almost non-existent breath. Her scent, a mix of rose and something darker, intoxicated me. She didn't speak a word, but her gaze was an invitation, one I couldn't refuse. She led me to an abandoned house on the city's outskirts, a crumbling building. Inside was cold, with peeling walls and floors covered in dust and debris. She moved with ghostly grace, guiding me to an upstairs room. The room was bare except for an old velvet sofa and a lit candle on a small table. She sat down, signaling me to do the same. Her gaze never left me, deep and hypnotic. That's when I noticed her fangs, long and sharp, emerging from behind her dark red lips. A shiver of terror ran down my spine, but it was too late to flee. With a quick, precise movement, she grabbed my arm and brought it to her lips. I felt the bite, sharp and painful, followed by dizziness as my blood began to flow into her. Every encounter with her was a mix of fear and pleasure. Night after night, I found myself returning to her, unable to resist her call. She fed me her blood, a dark, thick liquid that made me feel euphoric, powerful, yet increasingly weaker. Over time, I began noticing strange events in the city. People disappearing, bodies found drained of blood. Part of me knew it was her, my nocturnal lover, causing this carnage. But I was too bound to her, too dependent on her blood to pull away. One evening, as I fed from her wrist, I heard footsteps approaching. A young boy, one of Velinthra's many street orphans, entered the room. His face lit up with terror at the scene before him. Before he could scream or escape, she was upon him, her fangs sinking into the boy's neck. That's when the reality hit me full force. I had become an accomplice to a monster, a being feeding on innocent lives. I looked at the lifeless body of the boy, feeling a mix of nausea and despair. She looked at me, her green eyes now stained with red, and smiled cruelly. "You're one of us now," she whispered in the quiet of the room. "You can't escape what you've become." I left the house, staggering and confused. Velinthra's streets now seemed a labyrinth of shadows and threats. Every face I met seemed an accusation, every gaze a judgment. My existence had become a nightmare, a prison where I was both the jailer and the prisoner. In the following days, my mind was tormented by horrific visions. I saw the boy's face everywhere, in my dreams, in the shadows. His death became my beacon of guilt. I knew I had to stop her, stop the creature that had taken over my life. One night I gathered all my courage and returned to the abandoned house. It was silent, as if even the walls were waiting for my arrival. I climbed the creaking stairs, heart pounding, hand gripping the knife I had brought. I entered the room. There she was, sitting on the velvet sofa, her eyes shining with an inhuman glow. "You've returned," she said with a smile. "You can't stay away from me." "It has to end," I said, my voice trembling with fear and determination. She rose, approaching me with the same deadly grace. "You can't kill me. You're tied to me. We are the same creature now." Her face was close to mine, and I could feel her cold breath on my skin. With a shout, I plunged the knife into her chest. She screamed, a sound that was a mix of pain and rage, then collapsed to the floor. I approached her, looking into her eyes as life left her. But in her eyes, I saw no pain or fear, only a deep, dark love. Always you, always us. Those were her last words. I walked away, shaking my head as if to rid myself of a nightmare. But as I exited the house, I felt something within me change. A thirst, a hunger I had never known before. I looked at my reflection in a store window. My eyes now had the same green glow as hers. Was it over? Or was it just the beginning of something even darker and more terrible? My reflection stared back at me, a silent challenge, and in the shadows of Valenthra, I felt the call of the night, stronger than ever. I am a zombie. I am Harold. Have you ever wondered what happens when nightmares become reality? When horror has a name and a face? I'm Harold, the essence of terror that will make you wish you had never delved into the shadows. This story is my introduction, the unveiling of who I once was, and how it all began. This tale is just the tip of the iceberg, a prelude to the nightmares awaiting you. Are you sure you want to continue? I wasn't always the embodiment of terror I am now. Once I was a man devoted to goodness, a caring nurse in the local psychiatric hospital. I was the kind of person who would gently caress the cold cheeks of sick children, making them forget their grim reality, even in those dire places. I was a beacon of hope for those kids, an angel in white, casting an unusual light in a dark world. Despite being painfully aware of the sad truth, that too many of those innocent faces would leave the world prematurely, I dedicated myself unreservedly, allowing them to smile once more. Beyond caring for patients, I was a loving father and a doting husband. I knew genuine happiness, waking up each day with affection in my heart and a sincere smile on my lips. But life can be cruel, and it was cruel to me, Harold. My death was absurd and senseless. I perished in a car accident on a cold, unpleasant winter afternoon. Instead of receiving a final caress or a goodbye kiss, my life was ripped away in an icy, callous moment. My last vivid image was of my wife and kids, their laughter, their tenderness, a memory that, despite all the atrocities I've committed since, lingers deep within the loathsome abomination I've become. The outbreak of the contagion awakened me from death, revived my body, but not the kind and compassionate man that was Harold. My limbs became stiff, my skin pale, my face devoid of any sign of emotion or humanity. The only emotions driving me were a desperate hunger, a thirst for blood, and a need for human flesh. My existence had become a horrifying reality. While wandering through an abandoned supermarket, my glassy eyes fixed on a woman hiding behind a shelf. With a ferocious leap, I reached and grabbed her. My teeth sank into her neck, tearing flesh and arteries. Blood spurted, staining the decomposing products. The woman let out a final, agonizing scream before collapsing lifeless. I had become a monster, an aberration of rotting flesh and protruding bones, a living embodiment of extreme horror and hell on earth. My appearance was an affront to life itself, so terrifying it would make the darkest nightmares pale in comparison. No one could have imagined that behind this horror mask was once a man of great kindness and compassion. Now I am an inhuman entity wandering a world turned into a twilight hell. My actions are driven by a single, terrible instinct: to move, devour, destroy. There was no longer any mercy nor fear, just an eternal hunger gnawing at my rotten soul. A hunger that pushed me to commit unimaginable acts of violence. My stiff, cadaverous limbs move with a macabre rhythm, a ballet in a world in ruins. Every step is a silent scream, an echo of the hunger devouring me from within. I move with a staggering gait, arms dangling, hands contorted into claws ready to tear flesh and life. My semi-open mouth is an abyss of darkness, from which a guttural groan emerges, a sound more beastly than human. My daily routine is an endless cycle of horror. I roam the deserted streets, my glassy eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something or someone. But all I seek is food, fresh flesh to quench my insatiable hunger. When I spot a prey, my pace changes. I become quicker, more determined, as if a glimmer of intelligence had crossed my dead mind. As I dragged myself through the deserted streets, I came upon an elderly, defenseless man. A shiver of remorse passed through me, but it was quickly smothered by voracious hunger. With an animalistic howl, I pounced on him, tearing him apart in a ritual of pure horror. The old man had no time to scream. This is my life now, and when I attack, it's an explosion of pure violence. I pounce on my victim with supernatural strength. My hands grab, teeth bite, tear devour, and as I do so, a pained groan escapes my lips, a sound that's half pleasure and half torment. It's as if every bite reminds me of what I've lost, as if every drop of blood makes me relive a fragment of my lost humanity. But as soon as the prey is consumed, I return to my state of apathy, of emptiness. I resume my endless march, my body moved only by hunger, my soul a desert of desolation and regret. And so it continues, day after day, night after night, in an endless cycle of hunger and horror. Thus, I stand as the emblem of unadulterated terror, a monster made even more frightening by my original humanity. Despite my transformation into an abomination, a thin thread of humanity persists, an indelible residue of the past that neither time nor horror can erase. This duality, this tension between the human and the monstrous, is the pulsating heart of my terror, a terror as tangible as it is psychological, as visceral as it is emotional. But in the deep abyss of this horrid creature, a glimmer of humanity still survives. A solitary spark, a dying flame smolders in a dark and forgotten corner of my monstrous being. It's as if a part of Harold, the loving and caring nurse, remains trapped inside this death machine, a soul in chains, helplessly witnessing the acts of violence and destruction committed by its corrupted shell. A perverse sense of guilt assails me every time my insatiable hunger forces me to devour human flesh. Each bite, each tear of flesh, awakens in me a dull pain, a distorted echo of my past empathy. This trace of compassion for my victims is an aberration, a blasphemous offense to my current monstrous nature. It's a sharp dissonance in a melody of terror, amplifying my descent into abomination. Thus, I am perpetually trapped between two worlds, the bloodthirsty predator I've become and the empathetic man I once was. This tension, this dualism, is the quintessence of my terror, an emotional conflict that renders my existence a living nightmare, harrowing and unsettling. My story is a journey through the abyss, a raw and disquieting examination of the horror humanity can reach. But amidst this darkness, a shocking truth emerges. Even in the most devastated soul, a fragment of humanity can survive. This spark of remorse, however feeble, is a distant echo of my past life, a silent scream for all that has been irrevocably ripped away from me. I have become a symbol of extreme evil, a living warning of how low a human being can fall. In the heart of this horror, in my empty, inhuman eyes, I am a macabre fusion of past and present, once a man, now a monster, but still burdened with the weight of a lost soul. This weight amplifies my terror, making me a creature of nightmares beyond imagination. And if that spark of humanity were the key to an even greater terror? But if you think the terror is over, you're mistaken. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live in the shoes of a zombie? I, Harold, will give you an answer that will send shivers down your spine. Don't miss the next atrocities. Subscribe if you dare. The Cursed House. We weren't alone in that old manor. It was a dark and stormy night, the air thick with a tension you could almost touch. The atmosphere was heavy and damp, like it was trying to smother us. I was in an ancient, crumbling farmhouse, a place forgotten by time, with Mark, a friend I'd known for years, but who that night seemed almost a stranger. His familiar features now twisted by an incomprehensible shadow. Fear, perhaps. The chandeliers, covered in thick layers of dust and cobwebs, hung from the peeling ceilings like hanged bodies, swaying in a silent, macabre dance at the slightest whisper of wind sneaking through the cracks in the walls. Their creaking was a continuous lament, echoing through the silent corridors. "This place is creepy, huh?" Mark tried to break the silence with a nervous smile, but in his eyes danced pure terror, an abyss that not even adrenaline could mask. He couldn't fully hide the tension that kept his eyes wide and hands slightly trembling. "Definitely," I replied, with as calm a voice as I could muster. I was scanning the shadow-wrapped hallway, a stretch of darkness that seemed like an endless abyss. Each door, each corner, each crack in the walls seemed to conceal some unspeakable secret waiting to be revealed. Driven by teenage curiosity and without a clear plan, we ventured deeper into the house. Mark, with a mix of courage and recklessness, opened a door that creaked so ominously it sent shivers down our spines. Beyond the threshold lay a room forgotten by time, shrouded in a blanket of dust and cobwebs that obscured its contours, as if everything had stopped in an eternal agony. In this den of desolation, old books, their pages yellowed and dusty, lay in disordered heaps. Once, majestic candlesticks, now choked by darkness, hung motionless. A sharp, nauseating smell of mold hit us, almost like a punch to the stomach. "What a place. It's like something out of a horror movie," Mark commented, his voice altered by palpable anxiety. Even his eyes, once full of life, were now dull, as if the darkness had swallowed them. I was about to open my mouth to share my own apprehensions, when a low, guttural sound, almost a growl, emerged from the darkest corner of the room. Our hearts stopped. We turned, and there, motionless, staring at us, was a mutilated figure, its limbs twisted at impossible angles, covered in rags that seemed soaked with dried blood. Its eyes were empty, two black pits that seemed to burn with ancient hatred. Before we could react, Mark screamed. An inhuman scream filled with despair and pure terror. The mysterious figure with inhuman speed grabbed him with supernatural strength, its skeletal fingers piercing his throat like claws, and with brutal force dragged him away. Casting my name in a final, muffled cry, Mark disappeared into the void, swallowed by the darkness. The door closed behind him with a dull, final thud, like the seal on a tomb. I was left there, alone and paralyzed. The silence that followed was deafening, a void that consumed the soul. Then a voice whispered in my ear, cold as death, "You're next." And that voice, that terrifying, lifeless voice, was eerily similar to Mark's. If you don't want to be next, subscribe to the channel now. Together, we'll discover more terrifying stories. An abandoned mansion and the ghost's revenge. I don't know how it happened. One moment I was alive, and the next, I wasn't. But death wasn't the end for me. It was the beginning of a dark and tormented existence. I am a ghost, a soul trapped between two worlds, and this is my story. I find myself in an old Victorian house, a place that was once my home, now my eternal prison. The rooms, once full of life and warmth, lay silent, enveloped in an air of abandonment and desolation. The walls, once gleaming with vibrant hues, were now peeling and stained with mold. The wooden floor creaked under the weight of time, and each step echoed like a whisper in the night. The tenants upstairs were 3 students, known for their arrogance and disdain for anyone around them. The first, a tall, muscular young man with a constant air of superiority, always walked with a contemptuous smile on his lips, his eyes rarely showing a shred of respect for others. The second, shorter but equally arrogant, was known for his provocative attitude and crude jokes, his piercing gaze unsettling to anyone he met. The third, skinny with an eternally bored expression, spent most of his time mocking others with a sarcastic and irritating tone of voice. They were unaware of my presence, but not for long. My existence had become an obsession. I wanted to make them aware of my presence, my torment. So I began with small pranks, moving objects, sudden noises in the night, lights flickering on and off without explanation. I wanted to catch their attention, but it all seemed to go unnoticed, or was attributed to mere coincidences. My frustration grew into anger. I wanted them to see the ghost I had become. I wanted revenge. So one night I decided to manifest. I waited for them to gather in the living room, then materialized before them. My figure was translucent, my facial features distorted by time and suffering. My eyes, once lively, were now empty, lifeless. Terror painted their faces the moment they saw me. The 3 students, usually so arrogant, were paralyzed with fear. The tallest one jumped to his feet, his face blanched with horror. The second, usually talkative, emitted only a muffled moan. The third remained motionless, his eyes wide and fixed on me. My voice, a chilling whisper, echoed in the room. "Why did you do this to me?" They recognized me as the victim of their cruel game, the one they betrayed and left to die. I gave them a choice: face my eternal wrath or live with the guilt. In panic, they rushed to the door, but finding it locked, realized there was no escape. Their desperation was palpable, their terror real. I could hear their screams, the rapid beating of their hearts, their labored breaths. "You chose to stay," I said in a blood-chilling tone. The lights began to go out one by one, plunging them into the deepest darkness. Or perhaps you never had a choice. And with those words I vanished, leaving them to ponder their fate. But one thing was certain. They would never be alone again. Never. Now, with them trapped in the house, my revenge had just begun. Their presence continued to feed my spirit, allowing me to manifest with greater strength an eternal cycle of torment and revenge. And as their souls despaired in the darkness, a thought crossed my mind. Perhaps death is not the end, but just a new beginning. And you, listening there, comfortable and relaxed, with the false belief that you are safe, wonder if this story is over, right? But I assure you, it's just the beginning. Because in the house of horrors, no one is ever truly safe. And who knows, maybe the next soul to enter this cursed place will be you. Voodoo Rituals and Trapped Souls, the Key to Dark Secrets. In the heart of a foreboding swamp, distant from civilization and shrouded in the cloak of darkness, lies a house that seems frozen in time. This is the home of the Shadow Guardians, a place where daylight dares not enter, and where night stretches into an endless void. For generations, this family has practiced an art as ancient as it is horrifying, voodoo. But not just any voodoo, a dark, malevolent voodoo, capable of binding the souls of the unwary and the curious within a prison without walls. The house is a labyrinth of twisted corridors and hidden rooms, each holding a piece of the sinister puzzle assembled over centuries. And at the heart of it all, there's a key. Not just any key, but the key of darkness, forged in the flames of blasphemous rituals and soaked in the blood of innocence. It is the key that unlocks the door to the secret room where souls are bound and fates are sealed. Now, a new victim has arrived. A young woman named Claire, oblivious to the fate awaiting her, has crossed the threshold of this cursed abode. And as the Shadow Guardians welcome her with deceitful smiles, the key of darkness begins to quiver, as if thirsting. Thirsting for another soul to bind, another fate to seal. If you dare to continue, know that what lies ahead is a journey into the heart of darkness, where every corner may hide a deadly peril, and every shadow could be the last thing you see. For once the key of darkness turns, there is no going back, and the terror is just beginning. Are you ready? Then enter if you dare. But remember, the door you open might be your last. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The sky was cloaked in leaden clouds, as if nature itself wished to partake in our sinister ritual. Claire, the young woman who had responded to our advertisement, arrived in a worn-out car, parking beside the ancient stone fountain that graced the courtyard of our abode. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned off the engine, perhaps a harbinger of the horror that awaited her. "Welcome, Claire," greeted Eleanor, the family's matriarch, with a smile that concealed decades of secrets. "We're glad you're here." Claire returned the smile, unaware that each step she took inside the house brought her closer to the trap we had meticulously prepared for her. The facade of the dwelling was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture, with intricate details masking voodoo symbols. But Claire couldn't know that. Not yet. We led her around the house, showing her the tastefully furnished rooms, portraits of our ancestors hanging on the walls, and the library brimming with ancient tomes of magic and alchemy. Everything seemed perfect, an oasis of culture and sophistication. "This will be your room," Eleanor said, opening the door to a cozy but modest chamber. "I hope you find yourself comfortable with us." Claire nodded, placing her bag on the bed and casting a quick glance around the room. It was all so normal, so deceptively normal. "If you need anything, I'm here," Eleanor said, closing the door behind her. But Claire felt a different energy in the air, an invisible weight that seemed to press down on her. Driven by a curiosity she couldn't contain, she began to explore the room. And then she saw it. A small wooden chest, almost hidden in a corner of the wardrobe. She opened it and found an ancient key made of a dark metal corroded by time. The key seemed to call out to her as if it had a life of its own. Claire picked it up, feeling a chilling shiver run down her spine. With the key clutched in her hands, Claire heard a whisper, almost imperceptible, that seemed to emanate from the key itself. "Find the lock. Free the souls." And in that moment, Claire understood that this key was not just a piece of metal. It was an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. A challenge that, if accepted, could forever change not only her fate, but the very balance between the world of the living and that of the spirits. And so, as the night enveloped the abode of the Shadow Guardians in a cloak of darkness, Claire armed herself with courage. She was determined to find the lock that the key would open, unaware that she was about to cross a threshold from which there is no return. The ritual could finally begin anew, and the terror was just the beginning. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The night had fully descended when Claire decided to explore the mansion. The ancient key, now hidden in the pocket of her nightgown, seemed to pulsate, as if connected to some invisible force driving her to search. Lighting a candle, she began to walk along the dark corridors, the wooden floor creaking under her steps, as if protesting every inch she advanced. As she explored, she noticed details that had eluded her during the day. Strange symbols carved beneath the paintings, small voodoo deity statuettes hidden behind books in the library, and black candles placed seemingly at random, but which she knew held a deeper meaning. Each new discovery heightened her anxiety, yet curiosity propelled her forward. Finally, she arrived at the basement. A heavy wooden door, worn by time, stood before her. She pulled out the key from her pocket and inserted it into the lock. A shiver ran down her spine as the key turned with a sinister click, almost as if the door itself knew it had been opened by that key and no other. The door groaned open, revealing a room that seemed a sanctuary dedicated to darkness. Dark relics and artifacts were arranged on wooden shelves. Human skulls, amulets engraved with incomprehensible symbols, and at the center an altar on which lay an ancient book, covered in dust and candle wax. Claire felt a wave of pure terror as she entered the room, but it was as if an external force was guiding her, compelling her to proceed. She approached the altar and flipped through the book. The pages were filled with voodoo spells and rituals, and as she read, she understood the horror of the situation. This room was the beating heart of the house, the place where souls were bound and fate sealed. And now she was caught in that web of evil. But before she could fully comprehend the gravity of her discovery, she heard footsteps from the corridor. Someone was approaching. Claire quickly blew out the candle and hid behind a heavy velvet curtain, her heart pounding wildly. The basement door slowly opened, and a hooded figure entered the room, carrying a tray with new artifacts. Claire held her breath, praying her presence would go undetected. The figure placed the tray on the altar and began to chant a spell in an ancient, unknown language. Claire felt the air grow heavier, as if the room was responding to the invocation. Then, without warning, the figure stopped, as if sensing something. "Who's there?" it murmured, the voice trembling with an indecipherable emotion. Claire knew she had to act. With a swift movement, she grabbed the nearest object and hurled it at the figure, striking it and causing it to stagger backward. Seizing the moment of confusion, Claire darted out from her hiding place and ran towards the door, locking it behind her. As she ascended the stairs, the weight of realization hit her like a punch in the stomach. She wasn't just a prisoner in that house. She had become a pawn in a game far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. And as she took refuge in her room, a question crossed her mind, a question that would keep her awake for many nights to come. Was there truly a way out of this labyrinth of terror? This was only the beginning, and Claire knew that the night was still long. Chapter 3. The Ritual. The night was darker than ever, as if even the moon feared to illuminate our dwelling. We, the Shadow Guardians, were ready. The ritual room had been meticulously prepared. A circle of sea salt inscribed with voodoo symbols surrounded the altar, and black candles were arranged in an intricate geometric pattern. Every detail was calculated to maximize the power of the spell we were about to cast. While Claire was still trapped in her room, unaware of the fate that awaited her, we began our ritual. With trembling but resolute hands, we carved additional symbols into the wooden floor, while the black wax of the candles dripped like dark tears. Then, raising our hands to the sky, we began to chant the spell in a language known only to us, invoking the dark spirits that had granted our family the power to bind souls. But just as the ritual was reaching its climax, the door burst open. It was Mark, a family member who had always shown signs of weakness and remorse. "We can't continue to do this," he exclaimed, his eyes filled with despair. Without hesitation, I grabbed a ritualistic knife from the table beside me and stabbed him in the heart. Mark let out a muffled scream as his body collapsed to the ground, his eyes still open in an expression of horror and disbelief. "Your soul is now bound, as all the others before you," I whispered, as his spirit was absorbed by one of the grotesque artifacts adorning the room. With Mark's death, the ritual was now complete. We felt a surge of power flow through us, invigorating every fiber of our being. Now, we were ready for Claire. After intense hours, the ritual concluded, and just as we were about to leave the room, a dull noise came from upstairs. Then a voice, weak but clear, echoed through an ancient communication device that only we knew existed in the house. It was Mark's voice. "Claire, listen to me. I know how to stop them. You must—" The message abruptly cut off, but the damage was done. Claire had found a way to communicate with the spirit of our slain family member. How was this possible? Had she perhaps read one of our secret tomes? Now, Claire knew there was a way to stop us. As we looked at each other, understanding the gravity of the situation, a terrible realization hit us. The hunt had just begun, and the prey now knew how to become a hunter. And so, as the house remained enveloped in darkness, we knew that a terrible struggle was about to begin. A struggle not only for the souls we had bound, but also for Claire's soul, and perhaps, just perhaps, for the soul of our very family. The terror was just beginning, and the night was far from over. Chapter 4. The Trap. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the ticking of an ancient grandfather clock, seemingly counting down the remaining seconds of Claire's life. The young woman, her heart pounding in her throat, found herself in the library of our mansion, a place we had deliberately avoided showing her. Here, amidst volumes of forbidden texts and ancient manuscripts, she had discovered a book detailing our nefarious plan. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, each word etched like a dagger in her heart. I must get out of here, she thought, closing the book with a dull thud. But the house, now under our control, had other plans for her. Claire stood up, determined to escape, but the moment she laid her hand on the main door's handle, the door that would lead outside our mansion, the one that could have led Claire to salvation, it recoiled as if alive, merging with the surrounding wood. The windows followed suit, their glass turning as solid as walls. She was trapped. Just as despair was about to overwhelm her, an ethereal whisper reached her ear. "Claire, listen carefully," said the voice of Mark, our family member whom we had brutally slain. "There's a way to stop them, but you must be swift and precise." Claire's heart skipped a beat. There was a glimmer of hope, a chance to turn the tables. Mark revealed a spell that could nullify our power, but to do so, she had to reach the ritual room and recite it before we completed our malevolent design. "I'll be with you, Claire. You won't be alone," concluded Mark, his voice fading like a gentle breeze. Claire steeled herself. It was time to act, to become the hunter in a house of predators. With her heart throbbing with terror and determination, she prepared to undertake the most perilous journey of her life, armed only with the knowledge Mark had provided. And as Claire approached the secret door leading to the ritual room, we, oblivious to the impending danger, continued our preparations for the final ritual. But one thing was certain. That night, our mansion would witness an epic showdown, a battle for Claire's very soul and, perhaps, the future of the Shadow Guardians. Chapter 5. The Showdown. Clara's heart pounded like a war drum as she approached the ritual room. Each step was an act of rebellion, each breath a defiance of our power. She had memorized the spell Mark had whispered to her, repeating it in her mind like a mantra. The door to the ritual room was ajar, a slit in reality emitting an aura of pure evil. Clara took a deep breath and flung the door open, bursting into the room with fierce determination. "It's too late, Clara," we hissed, our faces twisted in a malevolent smile. "The ritual is complete." But Clara refused to give up. With a desperate cry, she began reciting the spell Mark had taught her. The words thundered through the room, shaking the black candles and the symbols etched on the floor. But just as Clara was about to complete the spell, a supernatural scream filled the room. Her cries turned to a silent whisper, her voice choked by an invisible force. Her body fell to the ground and, lifeless, as her soul was sucked into one of the vials on the secret room's shelf. We had won. Her soul was now bound, a trophy in our eternal collection of victims. "Welcome, Clara," we murmured, gazing at the vial, now containing her essence. "You are part of our family now, forever." The ritual room, filled with an even denser darkness, as if the entire universe recognized our triumph. We had bound another soul, and our power had reached new heights. As we reveled in our triumph, a sense of unease overcame us. Mark, our slain kin, appeared before us like a specter. "You haven't won," he said, his voice a mix of anger and despair. "Others will come. Your end is near." And as his image faded, a letter appeared inside the ritual circle. The message read, "Another curious soul is seeking work as a nurse." We smiled, but it was a tense smile cracked by Mark's warning. The key of darkness is ready to turn again, but this time a question pierced our minds. Who will be next? Will they free the souls we've bound, including Clara's? Our mansion is an abyss of darkness, a labyrinth of terror stretching beyond the bounds of reality. Every soul we trap is a step toward immortality, a piece in the mosaic of our immeasurable power. And as the key of darkness continues to turn, sealing the fate of anyone daring to cross our threshold, we know the cycle will never end. The letter on our table is a reminder that our future is already written in the blood and tears of past and future victims, and you, dear listener, might be next. Don't miss the next tale of terror. Subscribe now if you dare. The terror has only just begun, but remember, once the key of darkness turns, there is no going back. The day science created a monster. 2 shocking stories. Where reason crumbles and abomination takes form, 2 tormented souls unveil secrets that cast an unsettling light on the very essence of humanity. You will hear the tale of the doctor who dared to defy nature. And then I will take you into the depths of the monster's soul that was born from it. Light your lanterns. Our journey begins now. The night I became a monster. I was in the dark room of my laboratory, the rain beating against the windows like a symphony of the apocalypse. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I finished suturing the last flap of skin. It's done, I thought. Today science will triumph over God. A lightning bolt tore through the sky, providing the necessary energy to complete my experiment. The electrodes sparked, and the body on the operating table jerked to life. What I had created opened its eyes. But they weren't human eyes. They were abysses of torment and confusion. In that moment, I understood the horror of my arrogance. I hadn't given life. I had created a nightmare. No chain could contain it. It escaped, leaving death and destruction in its wake. Every report of its terrible advance was like a dagger in my heart. I had become a monster more terrible than the creature itself. One night I confronted it on a snow-covered peak. "You are my father, yet I am an abomination," it said with a voice that chilled my blood. "Destroy me, before I destroy everything." But I couldn't do it. That being was the culmination of my mistakes and ambitions. Instead, I gave it the freedom to leave, knowing that the price of my redemption was an eternity of torment. As the creature vanished into the darkness, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. I was not the creator. I was the creature. The real beast was human arrogance, and that beast lived in me. And so I remained alone with my demons in a night that would never end. My soul was lost, and the monster I had unleashed was nothing but a reflection of the monster I had become. And as the doctor confronts his own dark reflection, another heart begins to beat in the darkness, eager to tell its side of the story. The echo of darkness. My birth. The first thing I remember is a blinding flash followed by a wave of sharp and disorienting sensations. I felt life flowing in me like a torrent. Opening my eyes, I saw the face of the one who had created me. But there was no love in those eyes, only terror and disgust. I did not ask to be born. Yet, here I was, a mass of flesh and bones stitched together, animated by a force I did not understand. "Father, what have you done to me?" I screamed and fled, leaving behind the darkness of the laboratory. I escaped that prison and ventured into the outside world, hoping to find a place where I belonged. But wherever I went, I found only fear and rejection. People attacked me, as if I were the incarnation of all their nightmares, and in a way, I was. One night, on a snow-covered peak, I met him again, my creator. "You are my father, yet I am an abomination," I said to him, feeling my voice vibrate with emotions I should never have felt. "Destroy me, before I destroy everything." But he could not do it. In that moment, I understood that I was as much a prisoner of my existence as he was of his arrogance. "Go," he finally said. "Be free." I walked away, leaving behind the man who had sought to be God, and as I plunged into the darkness of the night, I realized a terrible truth. I was not the monster. The real monsters were loneliness and misunderstanding, dark forces that were now a part of me, inseparably. And so I delved into the dark, a shadow among shadows, an echo of the darkness from which I was born and to which, inevitably, I would return. At the climax of this grim journey, in the dark labyrinth where science meets horror, the two souls have revealed themselves, each a distorted reflection of the other. The question now is, who is truly the monster? If you dare, subscribe to the channel now, and together we will explore other uncharted abysses